two words. Two words that have been given by the press, by the public, by history, to two completely different men, in two completely different countries, in two completely different decades, for two completely different reasons. One of them killed people who begged him to, who signed forms, recorded statements, traveled hundreds of miles for the privilege of ending their own suffering on their own terms. He believed he was a pioneer. He believed he was fighting for the most basic human right that exists, the right to decide when enough is enough. The other killed people who had no idea it was coming, who had gone to see their doctor, a man they trusted, a man who knew their names, their children's names, who had time for them when no one else did, and never came home. Jack Kevorkian, Harold Shipman, both called to Dr. Death. One of them by his enemies, one of them by the receptionists who worked 3 doors down and were too afraid to say it to anyone who would listen. This is the story of both of them, and the question sitting at the center of it, the question the nickname refuses to answer, is one of the hardest this channel has ever asked. What does it mean to be a doctor who causes death? And does the answer change depending on why? Welcome back to Echoes of Darkness. This one is structured a little differently. We're running 2 cases in parallel throughout the video, and the structure is deliberate. Every time we look at one man, we look at the other, because the contrast is the point. Jack Kevorkian, American, Michigan, pathologist, assisted suicide, controversial, polarizing, ultimately convicted. Harold Shipman, British, Hyde, Greater Manchester, GP, serial killer, 250 victims. No one knows exactly why. Same nickname, opposite souls. Let's go.
Murad Yakub Kevorkian was born on May 26, 1928, in Pontiac, Michigan, the son of Armenian immigrants. He was brilliant, obsessive, and from early in his medical career, fascinated by death, not as a tragedy to be prevented at all costs, but as a medical event to be managed, understood, and when necessary, facilitated. He graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School in 1952. As a young doctor, he proposed in a 1959 medical journal that condemned prisoners should have the option of dying under anesthesia rather than face execution, their bodies then available for medical research. The proposal went nowhere, but it tells you everything about how Kevorkian saw the world. By the 1980s, he had been publishing in German medical journals on the ethics of euthanasia for years, and in 1987, he placed an advertisement in Detroit newspapers that may be the most extraordinary thing ever printed in a classified section. Physician consultant for death counseling. Jack Kevorkian's newspaper advertisement, Detroit, 1987. He built 2 machines, the Thanatron, Greek for death device, which delivered lethal doses of drugs intravenously at the patient's own activation, and later the Mersatron, which delivered carbon monoxide through a mask. He called the process medicide. He was entirely serious. He was entirely public about it. On June 4, 1990, in the back of a rusted Volkswagen van parked in a campground in Michigan, a 54-year-old woman named Janet Adkins, diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, terrified of losing herself, pressed the button on the Thanatron. Jack Kevorkian was with her. She died, and the world paid attention. Murder charges were filed and dropped. Michigan had no law against assisted suicide. Kevorkian kept going. Over the next 8 years, he assisted at least 130 people to die. He kept records. He gave interviews. He dared the state of Michigan to stop him. They tried 4 times, 3 acquittals, 1 mistrial. Kevorkian walked out of every courtroom. He was not, in those years, a man who was hiding. He was a man making a point, loudly, on purpose.
Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, the son of a lorry driver. No one in his family had been to university. He was bright, driven, and intensely close to his mother, Vera. When Shipman was 17 years old,
Vera was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. In her final weeks, her pain was managed at home with morphine injections administered by her family doctor. Shipman watched. He watched the drug enter her body and watched the pain ease. He watched it over and over until she died on June 21, 1963. He was 17. His mother was 42. And the way she died became, investigators would eventually conclude, his method of killing. Shipman graduated from Leeds Medical School in 1970 and began his career as a GP, first in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. In 1975, he was caught forging prescriptions for pethidine, a powerful synthetic opioid, for his own use. He was fined £600. He briefly attended a rehabilitation clinic. He was not struck off. That last sentence is one of the most consequential in British medical history. He was not struck off. He was allowed to return to practice. In 1977, fully aware of his history, a group practice in Hyde, Greater Manchester, hired him. In Hyde, Shipman became one of the most popular and trusted doctors in the town. Patients waited a year to get on Day's list. They described him as the kind of doctor who had time for you, who sat down, who listened, who would come out at short notice. He was described by patients as exceptional. The receptionists at a neighboring surgery had a different name for him. They called him Dr. Death. Not because they knew, because something felt wrong. The death rate among his elderly patients was noticed, quietly, by those paying attention. Nobody listened. There was a year-long wait to get onto his list. He was the most popular doctor in Hyde. Patient Paul Spencer, whose signature Shipman forged to appear as a witness to his last victim's will. The Lancet, 2004. The killing, investigators later concluded, had begun as early as 1971, when Shipman was still a junior doctor. For 23 years, he killed his patients with overdoses of diamorphine, medical heroin, injecting them either in his surgery or in their own homes, then signing their death certificates himself. He falsified medical records to show pre-existing conditions. He urged families to cremate their loved ones. He covered his tracks with the authority that only a trusted doctor has. No one stopped him for 23 years.
3 acquittals, 1 mistrial. Kevorkian walked out of every proceeding, got into his van, and kept going. He said during his 1994 trial, "I want to be convicted. I should walk up to the bench just like in the movie Gandhi and say, 'I have violated your law, and if you have any respect for your system, you will give me the harshest penalty possible.'" He was not posturing. He genuinely believed that a conviction would force the issue into the public consciousness in a way that acquittals never could. He was trying, by every action he took, to make the world have a conversation it was refusing to have. But there were serious concerns about his methods, concerns that went beyond the law. At least 19 patients died within 24 hours of first meeting Kevorkian. He failed to obtain psychiatric evaluations in at least 19 cases. 5 patients had histories of depression. 3 autopsies of people he assisted showed no physical evidence of disease at all. His most prominent critic within the assisted suicide movement, and there were many critics within that movement, argued that Kevorkian was doing more harm than good, that his methods were reckless, that the case for the right to die deserved better than a man with a van and a Volkswagen and a death machine built from spare parts. Kevorkian didn't care. He kept escalating. In 1998, he announced he had harvested a kidney from a patient he had assisted and offered it for transplant, knowing perfectly well no legitimate transplant center could accept it. He was not trying to advance medicine at that point. He was trying to provoke a response. He got one.
The Shipman Inquiry, a 2-year investigation chaired by High Court Judge Dame Janet Smith, examining nearly 900 deaths, returned a finding that is one of the most devastating indictments of institutional failure in British history. Harold Shipman was not invisible. He was seen, repeatedly, by multiple people over multiple years, and nothing was done. In March 1998, Dr. Linda Reynolds, a GP at the Brooks Surgery directly opposite Shipman's practice, went to the local coroner, John Pollard, and reported her concerns. She had noticed an unusually high number of cremation forms for elderly women, all countersigned as Shipman. She suspected he was killing his patients. The police investigation lasted 3 weeks. It was assigned to a detective inspector with no experience in medical homicide. He interviewed Dr. Reynolds and concluded, incorrectly, that she was describing a doctor who was simply more likely to visit his elderly patients at home and therefore more likely to be present when they naturally died. The investigation was closed on April 17, 1998. The Shipman inquiry later placed direct blame on the Greater Manchester Police for assigning inexperienced officers to the case. Shipman killed 15 more people between the closure of that investigation and his arrest in September 1998. The Shipman inquiry found that the system which allowed Shipman to operate for 23 years had multiple points of failure: inadequate death certification procedures, no independent oversight of a single-handed GP's prescribing habits, no system for correlating deaths across a practice, and a culture of deference to doctors that made challenging one, even when warning signs were clear, structurally difficult. The inquiry's recommendations reshaped British medical regulation. How did he avoid detection for 23 years? Because the system assumed doctors were good, because no one had designed a way to catch a killer who signed his own victims' death certificates and urged families to cremate the evidence, because he was, to his patients, the most trusted person in their world, and because the people who suspected him were not given the resources, authority, or support to act on their suspicions. He operated in the gap between trust and accountability, and for 23 years, that gap was wide enough to hide a quarter of a century of murder.
On September 17, 1998, Jack Kevorkian assisted in the death of Thomas Uke, a 52-year-old man with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. He could no longer swallow. He could barely move. He had given his informed consent in full. He wanted to die. This time, however, Kevorkian did not instruct his patient on how to activate the device. This time, Kevorkian administered the lethal injection himself. He was not assisting a suicide. He was performing euthanasia, and he filmed every second of it. He then called 60 Minutes and handed them the tape. On November 22, 1998, 60 Minutes broadcast the footage to more than 100 million viewers. Kevorkian appeared on camera afterward and dared the state of Michigan to come after him. Dying is not a crime. Jack Kevorkian, 60 Minutes, November 22, 1998. 3 days later, he was charged with first-degree murder. Michigan had, in the intervening months, finally closed the loophole that had permitted his previous acquittals. This time, there was no loophole. This time, he had not assisted a suicide. He had administered a lethal injection. This time, he chose to represent himself in court. On March 26, 1999, a Michigan jury convicted Jack Kevorkian of second-degree murder. Judge Jessica Cooper sentenced him to 10 to 25 years. He was 70 years old. He served 8. He was released on parole on June 1, 2007, on the condition that he would not assist any further deaths. He agreed. He kept his word. He died on June 3, 2011, at age 83. Kidney and respiratory failure. He refused artificial prolongation of his life. He needed no assistance. It was, by all accounts, painless.
Kathleen Grundy was 81 years old. She was the former mayor of Hyde, energetic, independent, by all accounts in good health. On June 24, 1998, Harold Shipman visited her at home. She was found dead shortly afterwards. Shipman certified the cause of death as old age. He urged the family to proceed with cremation as soon as possible. What Shipman had also done, for reasons the Shipman inquiry spent considerable time speculating about and ultimately could not fully explain, was forge a new will in Kathleen Grundy's name. The will left her entire estate, with nearly £400,000, to one person, Harold Shipman.
Kathleen Grundy's daughter, Angela Woodruff, was a solicitor. When she was notified of the existence of a second will, one she had never been told about, one that excluded her family entirely, one that was crudely typed and poorly witnessed, she went directly to the police. She knew it was a forgery. Grundy's body was exhumed. A postmortem found a lethal concentration of morphine in her tissues, administered hours before her death, during Shipman's visit. Police raided Shipman's home. They found a typewriter matching the forged will. They found jewelry belonging to his victims. They found falsified medical records. Dame Janet Smith, in her inquiry report, wrote that she believed Shipman had forged the will knowing it would be detected, that he had been, at the end, trying to be caught, that after 23 years, something in him had needed the reckoning. Harold Shipman was arrested on September 7, 1998. His trial began on October 5, 1999. He was convicted of 15 murders and 1 count of forgery on January 31, 2000, and sentenced to life with a whole life order. He would never be released. On January 13, 2004, one day before his 58th birthday, Harold Shipman was found dead in his cell at HM Prison Wakefield. He had hanged himself with his bedsheets. He left no note. He gave no confession. He never explained himself. His motives remain, to this day, officially unknown.
The nickname was given to Kevorkian by journalists who found his advocacy unsettling. It was given to Shipman, not by journalists, but by the receptionists who worked opposite his surgery, who noticed something wrong and used dark humor because they didn't know what else to do with the feeling. The same 2 words, 2 completely different meanings, 2 completely different moral universes. Kevorkian caused death deliberately, with consent, after consultation, in full public view, on the record, daring the state to stop him. He believed, wrongly or rightly, and I genuinely think that debate is still alive and still matters, that he was expanding human freedom. Shipman caused death deliberately, without consent, in private, with deception, for reasons that died with him. He never explained himself. He never showed remorse. He never offered anything to the families of 250 people he had murdered. He took that with him. There are people who call Kevorkian a hero. There are people who call him a murderer. The legal record says murderer. The assisted dying movement, now legal in multiple US states, in Canada, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, owes something of its public urgency to the conversation he forced. There is no one who calls Shipman a hero. There are people still who cannot fully explain what he was. Was he reenacting his mother's death over and over, with himself in the role of the doctor who controlled the morphine? Was he addicted to killing, as Dame Janet Smith suggested was possible? Was there a God complex, a belief that he was deciding who had lived long enough? We do not know. We will never know. What we know is this. The word doctor comes from the Latin docere, to teach. Doctors teach us, by their actions, what medicine is for, what the relationship between a physician and a patient means, what trust looks like, and what its betrayal looks like. Kevorkian and Shipman are both lessons. They're just teaching completely different things.
I've been sitting with both of these cases for a long time, and the thing I keep coming back to is not the deaths, not the numbers, not the methods, not even the verdicts. It's the trust. Every person who went to Harold Shipman trusted him completely. Every person who went to Jack Kevorkian trusted him completely, in a different way. They trusted him to do the thing they had decided they needed in a world that wouldn't let them do it any other way. Both kinds of trust are profound. Both were used by men who had decided they alone would determine the outcome. The difference is consent. And the difference consent makes between a man who gave people the death they asked for and a man who gave people the death he chose for them is, I think, the difference between a genuine ethical question and a straightforward atrocity. That doesn't make Kevorkian's methods beyond criticism. I think some of them clearly were. But it does mean the nickname was wrong, in at least one of those cases. Because Dr. Death implies something monstrous, and one of these men was a monster. The other was something more complicated. I'll leave you to decide which is which.
Thank you for staying with this one. It's a heavy one, and I know it. Leave a comment. I genuinely want to know where you landed on the Kevorkian question. The comment section on this video is going to be a conversation worth having. If you or someone you know is dealing with end-of-life decisions, the Death with Dignity National Center at deathwithdignity.org has resources on current U.S. state laws on assisted dying. If you're in the UK, Dignity in Dying at dignityindying.org.uk covers the same ground for British viewers. Next week on Echoes of Darkness, we go somewhere equally dark and equally human. The past is watching. Are you ready to look back?